Hello and welcome back to Rock Records Reviewed. My name's Adam, and this week we're going to review and rank all the studio albums by New York Clever Clogs Steely Dan. You'll know exactly what I mean by Clever Clogs if you are a Steely Dan fan. The band formed in New York in 1971. Walter Becker, a guitar player, and Donald Fagen, a singer and a piano player. They were college friends who'd met in 1967, and they'd played in covers bands together. One of them included Chevy Chase, of all people, on drums, before peddling their songs to the Brill Building in New York, where they wrote for stars, quite unsuccessfully, for stars like Barbra Streisand. Eventually, they were hired by producer Gary Katz to be staff writers at ABC in LA, but Katz turned around and said, look, your songs are kind of a bit too complex and clever to just be given to other musicians. They're too idiosyncratic. Why don't you form a band of your own? And they did, and so began a long and fruitful relationship between Gary Katz as producer and Becker and Fagen as Steely Dan. So they put a band together, including David Palmer on vocals, Jim Hodder on drums, Skunk Baxter and Denny Dias on guitars, and that was the first incarnation of Steely Dan. They went on to make 9 studio albums, but very much in sort of 3 stages. There was the first stage with the band, and then Becker and Fagen let the band go, and they used loads of session musicians, and then they disappeared off the scene and made a comeback and made 2 more albums. So there's kind of 3 stages of Steely Dan, I tend to think. Famously named after a sex toy from William Burroughs' novel The Naked Lunch. I think they're best known for their blending of rock and blues and jazz and Latin and rhythm and blues and probably anything else they could find. I mean, at worst, they've been accused of being sort of over-polished, over-clever yacht rock. But at best, I think Steely Dan's music is really sophisticated. It's amusing. It's highbrow. The songwriting really is sometimes of the highest order, and the musicianship is always of the highest order. Some of the playing on these albums is absolutely off the scale. They've sold over 40 million albums. And I think it's fair to say that Becker and Fagen are a couple of very, couple of clever clogs, as I would say. They're I've loved them all my life. Steely Dan I've had in my life for a long time. And there are bands I've loved more, and there are bands I felt much closer to and more passionate about. But because their music's been with me from a very early age, I've got a great affection for them. It's debatable as to whether they've actually ever made a bad album, but let's find out and let's crack on. So at number 9, I'm going to put their final album from 2003, Everything Must Go. You could argue that this is their only subpar album. I think some people would vehemently disagree with that, and some people will go, yeah, maybe it is. It's not a horror by any means at all. It just seems to lack the sparkle and fizz musically and lyrically that we have come to expect. Just the brilliance by this stage we would expect from people whose quality threshold is as high as Becker and Fagen's just doesn't quite seem to be on this album. There are no hits on here, and it was the only one of their albums not to go gold. Points of interest are it has kind of Walter Becker's first ever studio Steely Dan vocal on Slang of Ages, and it was actually made with a relatively small core of musicians, because by the time Dan signed off their second stage they were using an army of session players. I think it has its moments, this album, and lyrically there are still those little moments of sardonic wit that we've come to love and expect. But I think it was unfortunate that this was the last album they made, because it really wasn't a career peak for them to bow out on. Number 8, I'm going to put the album that just preceded that, from 2000, Two Against Nature, their 8th album. It was 20 years since the Dan had made an album, and then they had reunited 7 years prior to this and done some touring, but you can really barely hear the joins between this and the album that preceded it 20 years earlier, Guacho. And in fact, some people do think this album is a little bit of a Guacho Part 2, I mean, when Dan fans heard they were making a new record, they were ecstatic. But you know, for some reason, I can't seem to find the flesh on this album. It washes over me a little bit. And you know, as I said in my Joni Mitchell show, perhaps I'm just not smart enough to fully appreciate what they're doing. And so I kind of do admire this record without ever feeling tremendous affection for it, like I do with some of their other albums. I mean, there are highlights on here, certainly, tracks like Cousin Dupree and Gaslighting Abbey. And it won 4 Grammys and went platinum in America. Famously, it won Album of the Year at the Grammys, beating Beck and Radiohead and Eminem, which made a bit of a stir because they were fine records that those other artists made. Sold over 1 million copies. And I think, really, I think Steely Dan fans were just so happy to have them back, as were sort of the press and the critics. That the album itself might have been overpraised a little bit now that we have a bit of time to reassess it. But, you know, tell me what you think. At number 7, I'm going to put their 7th album from 1980, Guacho. No, this album's a tricky one. I mean, it took 2 years to make, and it was made under really, really difficult circumstances. Walter Becker's girlfriend had died, I think, of a drug overdose, and Donald Fagen had broken his leg, and they'd lost some demo tapes, and and they have I was talking about an army of musicians. They have over 50 session musicians playing on this album. Some people think this record is like the pinnacle of sophisticated jazz rock, and other people think it's just bland and trite. And only good for hotel elevators. I mean, I think the truth is probably somewhere in the middle a little bit. And it has some wonderful moments on it, like the title track and Hey 19, which is fabulous. Some people prefer the jazzy Steely Dan, and some people prefer the earlier kind of more guitar-led version. And if you just look around my studio here, you'll probably guess kind of which way I lean a little bit. The other accusation is it's just a little bit too similar to Asia, the album that preceded this one. After all the waiting people had done for it, it's just not quite on the level of Asia. It really isn't. And as pleasant and as accomplished as it is, by now Steely Dan were a very, very different proposition to the more traditional sort of verse, chorus, guitar-led band of their first album. And I think by this point, I was kind of missing that, I think. Didn't bother the record buyers. It still went platinum in the US. At number 6, I'm going to put their 4th album from 1975, Katie Lied. This is the first album the band made after they had disbanded the original lineup now. So now they're essentially a duo augmented by, this bewildering array of session players. For example, you've got Michael McDonald doing backing vocals on here. You've got Jeff Porcaro and Hal Blaine on drums. You've got the brilliant Larry Carlton on guitar. They all appear on this record and often on some of the other records as well. It's another really good album, but I think this one is more inconsistent than their first 3 albums. Bear in mind the threshold that we're dealing with here. I mean, it's still a very, very good album, this. It opens with the superb Black Friday. I mean, Steely Dan always opened their albums with an absolute cracking tune, certainly their first few albums. And that was a single, got to number 37 in the US charts. But I don't think they sustain that quality over the 10 tracks here. And in fact, Becker and Fagen themselves were not massive fans of this album, apparently, but not necessarily because the songs weren't that great. They weren't big fans of the sound quality. There was some big mix-up with the Dolby noise reduction, which affected the overall sound. And apparently, it got released without them ever hearing the full thing completely. The album, it was well received, but I think some people called it passionless. And cited a shift towards a sort of more clinical, less soulful approach to their music. But once again, the public didn't seem to mind. They were very, very popular at their peak, Steely Dan, and it was another album that went platinum in the US. At number 5, I'll put their 5th album from 1976, The Royal Scam. This is a divisive album in the Steely Dan catalogue. It's quite an uncompromising album lyrically and musically, and it's possibly their sort of hardest album. It's their edgiest record, which may have been a reaction to people claiming that the previous album, Katie Lied, was a little bit passionless. It's full of great tunes. You've got Haitian Divorce, Kid Charlemagne, The Fez. There's a lot of classic Steely Dan on this record. They got jazz legend Barry Carlton, who I mentioned earlier. He pops up as a guest, adding an absolutely brilliant solo on Kid Charlemagne. But he's one of 5 guitarists used on this album. And it is an album that does feature the guitar a little bit more than they had done previously. So maybe they were trying to get that passion back with the old axe. They hated the artwork for this album. Apparently, it was a picture that was originally intended for a Van Morrison album, but he didn't like it, so they ended up using it. Again, the album got to 15 in the US, number 11 in the UK, and it snuck into Colin Larkin's top 1,000 albums of all time at about number 868. At number 4, I'm going to put their second album from 1973, Countdown to Ecstasy. This album was regarded by some people as a flop after the success of their first album. I think that's mainly because there's no real big single on this one. It is very similar to their debut, but by this point, David Palmer, who'd sung a lot on the first album, had left. So Donald Fagen takes over all the singing duties on here. He had stage fright, Donald Fagen. So he was being encouraged to step forward now. Again, it opens with Bodhisattva, another fantastic opening. But I think overall on this album, the melodies are not quite as memorable as on the first album. It's less focused. You can hear the shift towards the sort of extended jazz workouts on tracks like Your Gold Teeth. Especially the solos all across the album, which lend an awful lot, far more to jazz stylings than to rock. Look, it's all very, very listenable. There's no baggage here at all, really, and it's impeccably cleanly recorded. And tracks like Razor Boy, Showbiz Kids, they make this a very, very solid sophomore record. But again, like I said before, it really does lack a killer hit single. The most popular tune on here is The Great My Old School. Lyrically on here, there's a lot of traditional Steely Dan subject matters. There's a lot of satire and parody about religion, about class, about Los Angeles itself, America. In the States, it went gold and only got to number 35, but it did make number 307 in Colin Larkin's top 1,000 albums of all time. I don't know why I keep referencing Colin Larkin as if he's some sort of Bible of what you should and shouldn't listen to, but he's as good a yardstick as anybody, I suppose. Now you're going to disagree with me probably if you're a big Steely Dan fan on my number 3, because I'm going to put Asia at number 3 from 1977, which was their 6th album. This is where I think the real musical sea change came in. But it is the album that most often sits at the top of a Steely Dan ranking. And I say this is where the real shift comes in, because now the band really is unapologetically a soft jazz rock pop outfit. I don't know what kind of label you want to use, but if you compare this album with, for example, any of their first few albums, this one really does take the jazz a step further. It has its detractors, this album, in the same way that Guacho did, but it just does drip with class. The songs are much, much longer here now. You've got 7 tracks over 40 minutes, a couple of the tracks running to sort of 7-8 minutes each. But there is more space in the arrangements. They're bringing in female backing vocals. There's jazz modulations all over the shop. It's a more laid-back record. You've got Michael McDonald adding beautiful backing vocals on the lovely hit Peg. I mean, just listen to a song like Peg. It's just brilliant, perfect example of great Steely Dan. It's irresistible. They hit the groove pocket immediately, and then you have all these wonderful little instrumental licks and hooks just popping in and out of the song all the way through. And another absolutely unbelievable guitar solo as well. It's just great. But it's not the only brilliant thing on here. You've got Deacon Blues, which is like as smooth as a baby's bottom. You've got Josie, which is another just, really snappy jazz groove. And these grooves, they don't let go, because, like I said, you've got these wonderful little tasteful, lovely, catchy hooks popping in and out, holding your interest underneath these fantastic, the drumming on some of these records is just sublime. It's amazing. It's all so sophisticated. Is it too sophisticated? Is it too sophisticated? Put my teeth back in. Try saying sophisticated twice really fast. I have to say, I grew up on the Beatles and the Stones and Neil Young and Bob Dylan, so I like a little bit more human error in my music, a little bit more imperfection, perfect imperfection, I call it, especially when you listen to, a lot of Neil Young stuff. But who am I to criticize Steely Dan? I bow at their feet. The quality level on every track here is obvious. And, you have some of the greatest musicians of all time doing their thing brilliantly here. Steve Gadd, Bernard Purdie, Larry Carlton, Steve Kahn, and many, many more fabulous players. So look, while it's not my favourite Steely Dan album, it has to be up there, and I can easily see why somebody would make this their favourite Steely Dan album, and I'm sure many of you do. They loved it in the States, where it went 3 times platinum. It came with silver in the UK. And it is, like so many of the great records we've reviewed on Rock Records Reviewed, in the Library of Congress as being an artifact of great cultural, artistic and historical significance. So we've got 2 more Steely Dan albums to look at. And at number 2, I'm going to put their 3rd album from 1974, Pretzel Logic. I think this is more song-based than Countdown to Ecstasy. Ecstasy. I don't know what's up with my teeth today. Countdown to Ecstasy, which was their 2nd album. And I love this album. This is their shortest and poppiest album. You've got 11 songs over 33 minutes. That's almost Ramones-like, isn't it? And it takes in all styles. It takes in blues and jazz and all the usual stuff. Wonderful songs on here. You've got the great bluesy title track. You've got fabulous sort of Ricky Don't Lose My that number, which I've always been one of my favourite songs of theirs, and actually to this point became their biggest hit. Some of these songs are amongst their most deceptively conventional. Like the title track Pretzel Logic with its kind of jazzy bluesy shuffle. But they're buoyed up by great lyrics. I've never met Napoleon, but I plan to find the time. When you have a lyric like that just popping out at you in the middle of this groove, you can't help but just sort of think, oh, that's great. It just sits so beautifully in the music. Then you've got weird stuff like East St. Louis Toulouse, which is sort of this jazzy ragtime instrumental. I think the public were underwhelmed with their 2nd album, so they came back with this. Maybe there was a deliberate move to just make things a little bit more concise and snappier. This is also on the 3rd album, the point where they did start bringing in a few session players. So they were starting to look beyond the limitations of what they had as a band. For example, you've got Jim Gordon on drums from Derek and the Dominoes, no less. Platinum in the US, gold in the UK. So Steely Dan, were absolutely up and running quite early on as a band, doing good sales figures. But let's get to my favourite Steely Dan album, and it is their debut album from 1972, Cant Buy A Thrill. And that is going to upset a lot of you traditional Steely Dan fans, especially the ones of you who love the later incarnation, the jazzier incarnation. But look, I think this is absolutely one of the great debut albums, and it narrowly missed out on my debut show, which you can find in the videos. Not my debut show, my show about debut albums, I should clarify. Perhaps it didn't get in there, maybe because it's not quite as influential as some of the other ones I put in there. produced by Gary Katz, as was all their stuff from LA, and you know, this is just full of brilliant songs. Every single one of them I could sing to you now. Brooklyn Knows the Charmer opens with Do It Again, Midnight Cruiser, Dirty Work, and the absolutely sublime Reelin' in the Years, which is one of my favourite songs of all time, and of course has this incredible guitar solo by Elliot Randall on it, a guitar solo I have been trying to master for years. I will get there one day, and when I do, I'll play it for you. They are, like we said, they're a band at this point. They're very much a band at this point, with Dearce and Baxter and Hodder and Becker and Fagan, Palmer on vocals. But you know, Fagan sings some vocals, Palmer sings some vocals. You don't really hear the joins anywhere because it's all so beautifully produced. It's also beautifully put together. It's the craft in the songwriting and the arrangement is absolutely there from the word go. These are people who clearly have their ship together. I said ship people. You can see why they held on to Gary Katz for an entire career. It's obviously a very, very symbiotic relationship because the production, the arrangements, everything is working perfectly from the get-go. I think it's one of the slickest debut albums you'll ever hear produced, and I think of all their records, this is one of the easiest ones to quantify. I mean, this is a soft rock album with hints of the broader musical palette to come. It's a clever and it's an impressive debut, and if you like intelligent, sophisticated soft rock with the odd musical surprise, then this is absolutely an essential record for you. So that is my list of Steely Dan records. As I said, people tend to prefer the earlier Dan or the later Dan, so let me know what you like and let me know where you put all their records. I think if you're new to Steely Dan, then I would absolutely certainly get Asia, and I would certainly get Can't Buy a Thrill, because I think those are the best examples of the two incarnations. After that, I mean, they're all good really, but perhaps maybe be wary of the last two albums, Everything Must Go and Two Against Nature. Away from the studio albums, I mean, there's a lot of live Dan stuff out there now, especially if you got Spotify, a lot of sort of unofficial stuff. But I would be wary. I think Steely Dan stuff is so impeccably and beautifully produced. They're very much a studio band for me. I've never been impressed with a Steely Dan live album. It just doesn't capture the magic of what they did in the studio. As much as I love Reelin' in the Years, I never want to hear Steely Dan do it live. I never will, because sadly Walter Becker died in 2017. Donald Fagen has made a couple of really good solo albums. One of them, The Nightfly, is an essential album, really. It's fantastic. His other one, Kamakiriad, was also pretty good, but Nightfly is absolutely essential and the equal of pretty much anything on this list. As an aside, Skunk Baxter, the legendary Skunk Baxter, bizarrely is now a consultant for the US military with regards missiles and rocketry. So talk about a career change there. Anyway, look, that's my list of Steely Dan. So do let me know what you think. I'd love to read your comments below. And I will be back again very soon for another Rock Records review. So thanks a lot. Bye-bye.